NCTV45, The Train, anytime on your time. Gentlemen, if you want to look your best with high-quality clothing, then I recommend Main Street Clothiers and Custom Tailors in downtown Newcastle. Mike Caggiano is the owner, and he and his staff have been in the business for decades, and they will always give you the right recommendations. They also carry Rondinelli tuxedos. That's Main Street Clothiers and Custom Tailors, 210 East Washington Street, downtown Newcastle. Call 724-652-3851. Daimio and Olson Law Group, where every client matters. Serving Newcastle, Elwood City, and Youngstown. Daimio and Olson handles criminal law, bankruptcy, civil matters, workers' compensation, personal injury, medical malpractice, divorce, wills, real estate, and many more legal issues. Call any one of their offices in Newcastle, Elwood City, or Youngstown with these phone numbers. Open Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Daimio and Olson Law Group, where every client matters.
It could be you, it could be me, it could be everything we see. Given the day, given the time, given the moment. It could be you, it could be me, it could be everything we see. Given the day, given the time, given the moment. Some of it comes.
Welcome to the Washington Outsider on NCTV45. This is host Matthew Geiger from the Washington Outsider, washingtonoutsider.org. Check out our latest take on the news and issues of the day. We update 3 days a week. Today I've kind of been looking around just over the last week, or a little while here, and I was writing some stuff on South America. I think there's some real issues that are maybe being overlooked. We also have, of course, North Korea taking the spotlight now, threatening the South, and, war, exchange of fires. We also have the ongoing Ukraine crisis, the Middle East, and inside our country of issues. We have illegal immigration, Donald Trump, of course. I've kind of predicted somewhat of a you might call a Latin or Hispanic spring coming up, and that would basically be like an Arab Spring style event occurring, and not necessarily in the spring, but we call it the Arab Spring, so Latin Spring kind of go together. And a lot of the grievances has been pretty steady. I mean, South America, it's been very socialistic, where America really became very capitalistic. They kind of stayed neutral. They've done experimentation with capitalism, but it's been used as an excuse to kind of divert wealth. And so they've really struggled with the same old pre-socialist, pre-democracy kind of fighting, where you had unresponsive government that didn't exist for the people, it existed for the elites. And but you look in the United States, you see a lot of similar things. And one of the things that really tends to irritate Americans is welfare. Social, welfare, specifically, SNAP benefits, everything. But there was some interesting statistics that came out in some analysis a little while ago. And this goes about, when you look at corporate welfare, which includes, tax subsidies, you can include different tax breaks. You can look at direct subsidies, which are, when they just throw money in. You can look at, just fees that are allowed, subsidies in local, federal, which creates competition. You can also look at tax havens, and you get about $6,000 per family. That's the cost of social welfare. And of course, it was raised by some critics that there's other forms, such as tariffs, costing the taxpayer. I, for one, have argued the inverse is true. The lack of tariffs means we have to tax Americans more and American businesses more, so that would, actually, the lack of tariffing in the raises the benefit. And the issue we have with corporate taxes is too low of ones, is that one, our corporate tax system's a mess. When we give one tax company a break, that means every other company gets higher, has to pay higher taxes. When we give a corporation a break, businesses in general a break, that means families have to pay more, which is, clearly economies exist for the people. So we've really gotten to this kind of backwards system. And it gets to this issue of fairness. Now I'll tell you, a little while ago, the end of August, they had what's called a brew festival. And in case no one knows, my brother and I started learning how to brew beer about 1.5 years ago. And it's about drinking I don't really care for that many beers, and I didn't really until after I tried this, what they call craft beers. And there's a few that I like. And I'm kind of going along to this festival. It was our first one ever. It was a fun time. We camped out. We had a lot of conversations. There's a lot of IT guys, security, technical people that go to these, and if you saw some of the stuff, engineering, and we had some great conversations, and trust me, I got lost on it. They using acronyms and concepts that good luck. But some of the interesting thing that happened was this was out at Cooper's Lake, where you might know this. There's a big medieval fair out there, beautiful place, 650 acres, I think it was. Maybe it was 450, but details. But they have this big thing called Penzic out there, and they reenact the medieval times. My other younger brother went to it. He said it's a lot of fun. But we were out there, and there were 170 beers to sample from, and we had to serve our own, so we didn't get to very many of those. Obviously, that's a lot of booths to go to. But one particular, there's about 600-700 tasters who could have voted. They didn't really explain the rules to us, so a lot of people didn't show up. Well, when you have 170 beers and 600-700 votes available, that's not a good sample. And the one that won was what's called I believe it was an Imperial Stout. And that's kind of a really thick, creamy, and has bitter, strong, sweet, just basically everything you could have in beer, like super strong. It's a Russian drink. It's okay in the winter. It's more like a whiskey. You sip on it really slowly. I've tried it. I don't think I'd ever actually buy one, but I've had friends give me. But they won, and it was, when you compare it on a hot summer day, on a weekend, and see, how did they win? Well, that sample size wasn't right. That wasn't the ratio of the voting ability wasn't right, so statistically it was flawed. And then you had a sense that were actually lobbying people. They brought in friends. So there was this sense of fairness and unfairness. It was a situation where the results were legitimate. I don't think they were cheating. I don't think the judges were cheating. They weren't because they're friends. But it left people with the sense that maybe there was. It left them with a sense of injustice. And when we look at the broader society, that's kind of what we get this feeling of when we talk about subsidies. And so when we get back, when we talk about things like public welfare, social welfare, government involvement, the economy. And I want to we have to take a little break to hear from some of our local sponsors here in Newcastle. But when we get back, I'd like to continue this on, kind of give you a conspiracy of corporate welfare versus social welfare, and then talk a little bit things. So just see you right back in a minute.
Come dine with us, come dine today. If you could use some real good food, there's a place not far away. If you could use a drink or two, or a place to go and play, come to Gallows Italian Villa today.
Mary's Middle Eastern Restaurant. Yes, fine Middle Eastern food where elegance and charm meet old world goodness. Great lamb, chicken, and so much more. Mary's, located on Long Avenue in Newcastle. Call 724 652-2447.
The Crane Room is a restaurant. The Crane Room is a bar. The Crane Room is a banquet facility. The restaurant will please you time after time with their diverse menu. Ask about their daily specials. See the menu at craneroom.com. The bar gives you an abundance of choices with 35 beers on tap and always changing. Their banquet services are always to perfection. The Crane Room, located at 3009 Wilmington Road in Neshannock Township. Call 724-656-1553.
Hi, welcome back to the Washington Outsider on NCTV45. This is host Matthew Geiger from the Washington Outsider, www.washingtonoutsider.org. And today we're talking about a little bit of fairness, the idea of social fairness, legitimacy. I just gave an example of how voting on at this beer festival, how there weren't enough votes and the winner was kind of a little begrudgingly. When you go to South America, when you look in, cities in the United States and people struggling income-wise, people without work, they look at this and say, well, these guys are doing well. And there's this sense of a lack of fairness. Now, that often provokes a response, well, people on welfare are lazy. People on food stamps are lazy, they just want to get by. And it's an interesting thing. They're taking from me my money. Well, when you look at the statistics, I mentioned earlier about $6,000 per family in what they call corporate welfare. We could argue about different things. We could throw in trade, and I would come back and say it was something different. I would say that the lack of tariffs actually means we have to tax Americans more. We could talk about unemployment benefits for middle-class families. And say a lot of times when people go on unemployment, especially in the working class, the subsidies, what happens is that there's some jobs out there, a good sector in the manufacturer especially, where people will go out, work 60 hours a week, 80, which is, unfortunately it would be nice if some of those hours could be used to employ some other people, but then they'll have periods of unemployment, they'll be on unemployment, and you do the calculations, they're making more on the unemployment than a family would get on welfare. Also, if you're on a minimum wage job, you tend not to collect benefits. So it ends up being the subsidy for the middle class is actually a lot higher, and there's a social argument for doing away with unemployment benefits as well as retirement, if your retirement pension fund goes bankrupt, the government steps in, and there's been arguments against that. I, for one, think that that's very counterproductive and would be destructive, but if it is a good point to make when condemning people. And, as I think you viewers have gotten this from me before, but I don't really like to condemn people. And, I've looked in, when I talk about kind of public assistance programs, I talk about, instead of saying they're lazy and stuff, I've always preferred to go look at what is the psychology, what is the disadvantage they have. But when we look at the numbers, and I'm not saying it's okay, because, when you see people relying on social welfare programs, you either, one, have a problem with the person, which you solve the problem, you address that, you solve the problem, and you take away the need. The need doesn't exist. Or there's a problem with the economy. Now, if there's an economy, and then you got to solve that problem. Well, if you're subsidizing Walmart and they're not paying, which they do, I think it was $244 billion for just, or 244 of their Walmart stores received about $1 billion in 2013. So that was just one number. And you look at the overall spending on corporate welfare, it's about double than what it is on social. And of course, we could talk about Medicare and Medicaid and stuff, but then we'd have to, all kinds of factors, but it works out. But if you look at outside of the medical, the welfare expenditure compared to the corporate is for a corporate, it's at the low end $2,500 to $6,000 per family, making $50,000 a year. Okay, now the welfare benefits for food stamps, it's $36 a year. $6 for the rest of the programs outside of, and if you wanted to count Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid and Medicare would be a lot more. But again, we usually don't consider those welfare. But, you know, so that the argument that people are just siphoning out of middle class families, even though it creates a lot of outrages, it's very distorting, because these companies, they're making they're getting 6,000. It's like if the middle class family had to pay, they went out and paid. They had to pay a bill for the welfare. It would be, for a year, you'd get a tax bill of $42. If you had to pay for the corporate welfare, it'd be $6,000. And let me remind you, 90% of the population makes around $30,000 a year, 32 now, I think, because they raise minimum wage. So that means the middle class burden's even higher when it comes down to it. So, you know, you want to talk about a sense of fairness. We're very quick to condemn the people living in poverty. So there's a real issue here of looking at, seeing that instead of condemning people, instead of saying it's not, you know, you're taking from me on the middle class side, we're paying for you, and then from the poverty standpoint, the system screws me over. There's some real issues, and we need to get beyond our attitudes. And there is a lack of sense of attitude. If you talk to poor people, there is a sense that the system's rigged against them. And in some sense, there's cases where we can change things that have, but, you know, saying it doesn't fix the problem. Condemning these people on welfare or any public subsidy doesn't fix the problem. So, you know, and it's not as detrimental. There's kind of the you know, the welfare image of people are lazy and stupid is just, it's kind of, we get caught on that, the emotion of it, when we need to really look at the bigger subsidy issues, and of course on the Washington Outsider website, WashingtonOutsider.org, if you go under menu, tools for analysis, economics, you'll find a whole bunch of articles talking about how different ways to look at the economy, including some on the psychology of disadvantage. You know, what's going on, and that's part of the important conversation that needs to have. But, you know, an interesting thing, and I've you know, while we're talking about this kind of issue, is that there's really kind of a mentality that gets involved in communities where you want to say people on public assistance, they just want to be supported. They don't want any more. Well, there's a little important thing if we really look at it. There's some important issues that we could really look at it this a little bit. Let me give a little bit of a different perspective on it. You know, we condemn people, but, you know, there's a lot of people on public assistance who will go out and try to do other things. They'll try and start a business, or they'll do they'll you know, seemingly run around and they just don't get a job. But what there is this sense of subsidy versus people who are just, you know, going along, getting along. But there's also a middle class version of this. And, you know, I know, and this is probably going to outrage hardworking people, but there's people who just go to work. You know, maybe their family had a business, maybe their other family had a business, maybe they've been in the family industry, the same industry, their parents, but they just go along. And that's the situation people on welfare, generational welfare, get, is they just go along to get along. And that's, you know what, you can see that on the low income when it comes to welfare, when it comes to the middle class going to work, people, and then when it comes to the wealthy, you can see that. And that's go along to get along attitude. You know, yeah, okay, it affects you when it's on the public dime, but also it affects us on the community too, when it's the middle class and the wealthy, the more affluent. Why? It's because when things start to change, and we know we struggle with economics, when there's issues that arise, instead of correcting issues that go along to get along, attitude prevents us from improving upon things. And it prevents us from addressing, because they're not willing to face that, the need to address an issue. They're not willing to face fairness or even the perceived lack of fairness. And that's a situation that really leads to a lot of problems just mounting over months, decades, years. And we see that in communities, especially in Newcastle. We see that in South America. Right now we have to take a little break, and I'm going to leave you just to think on that a little bit. But when we get back, we're going to kind of finish up and maybe put it in a little broader sense so this can actually be a little more meaningful to you.
Tuscany Square Restaurant, 3470 Wilmington Road, where old world charm meets today's modern conveniences. You'll enjoy their spacious, comfortable seating, their fresh ingredients that go into making every dish, whether it's pizza or that just right entree. Tuscany Square Restaurant, they're here to serve you. Call 724-654-3065.
Whether it's a scheduled appointment or same-day service, DiCaprio Carpet Cleaning offers 24/7 service for commercial, industrial, and residential, as well as fire and water damage restoration. Using state-of-the-art technology, DiCaprio Carpet Cleaning experts are ready to professionally clean your carpet today. Call DiCaprio Carpet Cleaning for a free in-home estimate. Thank you for making us Lawrence and Mercer County's largest carpet cleaner.
And remember, nobody gets your carpet cleaner.
Joshua Son Rehabilitation Center. From the moment you arrive, you know that you're in the right place. Dr. John Wrightson listens first. He pays attention to detail and then makes the determination. Joshua Son Rehabilitation. We make the pain go away. All in a nutshell, 102 and 117 North Mercer Street in Newcastle. Visit Keith and Margot Jackson for that new look. The latest in women's and men's clothing. Treat yourself today. You'll be glad you did.
Hi, welcome back to the Washington Outsider on NCTV45. This is host Matthew Geiger from the Washington Outsider, WashingtonOutsider.org. Please check out our blog post. We're updated 3 days a week, and as well as our other sections under our menu. Today we're talking about two concepts: the sense of fairness and this get along to go along mentality that you can see in poverty, you can see on the case of middle class and affluent, and how that affects. Now, public welfare has tended to really drive a lot of emotions. And of course, the statistics are kind of starting to show us that, you know, the average hardworking American middle class family, $50,000 a year is the median income, is costing families about $6,000 per year for corporate welfare versus $42 for welfare. Well, for a lot of the poor, they see the hardworking as not necessarily a chance. They see hardworking people say, I want it to be in that lifestyle. And there are people who are born who get connections and stuff through their families. And then there's poor people who struggle, who want opportunity. And they feel as though the opportunity, but there's still a persistence. Then there's people who are just, this is the life I was born into, I'll accept it. The middle class family, this is the life I was born into, I'll accept it. The wealthy, the affluent, this is the life I'll just accept it. I'll just go along. But when we have serious issues that arise, like we see poverty persistent, that works on people. And when there's a lack of sense of fairness, or at least a perceived lack of sense, and people think that things aren't fair, that tends to build anger. And we look in South America, there's a lot of civil unrest happening, and we may well see that erupt into something much bigger. We've also seen this in the Middle East, that there are people out there who, yes, a lot of subsidies out there, social welfare, their economies don't exist to serve their people. And the United States struggles with this too now, more and more. And when there is that, there's a sense of, I want to work hard, I want to get a better lifestyle. When you don't have that sense of fairness, then you end up having these social issues, this civil unrest, which eventually destabilizes whole nations, communities. And for those who who have a decent lifestyle and who may be seeing a change in the economy threatening as a threat to their income, their business, increased competition. You end up having a situation where you get a social conflict. You also end up, really intensifying, polarizing people. And you also get that go along to get along mentality where it feels like for the people who are maybe beneath them feel like they're being suppressed. And this creates friction, this creates emotion, this creates outbursts. And it's just a sense, an overall sense that when you have groups, you tend to start name calling. I mean, you talk to anyone about, public assistance, there's some pretty mean things said. There's some pretty mean things said about corporate, wealthy people when it comes to decisions, when it comes to political influence. There's mean things said about middle-class families by different people. I mean, it just gets nasty. It just gets, instead of really focusing on the issue, we tend to say, how is this guy screwing me over? And when it's not even about that. It's about saying, hey, I don't think things are fair, or I'm looking for a chance to improve. Give me that chance. It's easy to say someone's worthless. It's easy to say someone's lazy, someone's trying to hurt me. Or it's easier just to say screw you to someone. It's a lot harder to actually work with someone to come up with an answer that meets our most beneficial issues. And we, of course, I think our society's become very individualistic, and we've talked about this with liberalization, kind of how there's been a focus on me. How does this how does this benefit the community and benefit us all? How can we enrich I'm a firm believer you should enrich yourself by enriching others. And that's where it gets really comes. So we have to stop looking over this we need to start looking at how there's this perceived unfairness. Why is there a true unfairness? And can we maybe address that, open up new opportunities? Can we not fight instead of letting that degenerate into fighting? And we need to get beyond that go along to get along. There's a lot of hardworking people that, even hardworking people who just, this is their lifestyle, and it creates them issues. They feel very dissatisfied. I can't tell you how many people who I know who've made $60,000 or more a year and feel very disappointed. Well, it's because they've been kind of boxed in. There's doctors who just went in the business because their dad was in the business. Lawyers. Not only does that affect their personal life, but it also affects how they treat others and how they interact. And that affects our overall community ability. And it also affects their, if your attitude is, because I work hard, I deserve this, but this person didn't work as hard. And a lot of times in America, we tend to also assign someone's income to the value of how hard they work. There are people who work very hard, hours upon hours, and don't get paid a lot. But, does that mean the guy who makes more money, is he working just as hard? Not necessarily. And I'm not saying that, I'm not doing that to discredit anyone, but when we engage these kind of economic situations, when we look at public welfare issues like this, we got to ask ourselves, okay, one, is this person just lazy? Two, if we give them an opportunity and they don't take advantage of it, is it again because they're lazy, or is it because there's some dysfunctionality there, some other issue? And there's a whole broad range of topics we could talk about here, but those are just some ideas I think we, as a community, as a society, need to really focus on. So, a sense of fairness from our perspective, from the perspective of others. There's people on assistance who look at the system and who look at the economy and say, this isn't fair. I just want a decent job. I just want to make a good living. There's people who make a good living who say, I don't want to pay for other people to be lazy, to sit around. If you look at it from each other's perspectives and really just say, well, maybe it's just not a sense of fairness, maybe there's a real issue, and then start dealing with it. And at the same time, the go along to get along attitude, well, when you have, that's fine for a while, but whenever you start struggling, you know, and business owners will tell you, there are times when their business will be going great for years. They don't have to do much they don't have to change very much. But then they run into a patch, and that's the point when they get creative. And that's what happens in communities where we're struggling. Newcastle, whether it's in Brazil, Mexico, you know, the Middle East, when there's a time to change, we can't just go along to get along. And that's a good message for Washington to hear. Instead of turning against each other, let's get going and fix some problems. Well, I'm going to leave you with that thought. This has been the Washington Outsider with host Matthew Geiger from the Washington Outsider. Don't forget to check out our latest posts and different discussions. www.washingtonoutsider.org. Thank you once again for joining me.
Welcome to the Silk Road Fair Trade Market, home of those uncommon treasures. When the farmery searches the world over to pick out just the right gift. So stop by the Silk Road Fair Trade Market. You'll be glad you did.
Butts Flowers and Gifts offers top quality flower arrangements and gifts for any occasion. The pros at Butts Flowers and Gifts provide exceptional customer service, and each bouquet is hand arranged. Stop in and check out their wide selection of gift baskets and plants. They provide flower delivery service locally to Newcastle, Bessemer, Edinburgh, New Wilmington, West Pittsburgh, and across the nation. It's Butts Flowers at 120 East Washington Street in downtown Newcastle. Call 724-652-7727 or toll free 1-800-443-7726. The Cedars is a great restaurant with outstanding Mediterranean food. The Cedars takeout menu is second to none, featuring pizza, stromboli, hoagies, their famous lamb on the rod, and so much more. So when you're hungry and you want that Newcastle taste, make it Cedars. Now with 2 locations in Newcastle, 827 Addis Street on the east side and 1101 Highland Avenue. Call Cedars East 724-658-9260 or Cedars North 724-652-7657.
Bring into NCTV45.